Hi, I'm Stuart Hughes, IOSH President, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you the IOSH Models of Safety brought to you by IOSH for Business. So get ready for a great journey through culture, both societal and workplace, and its impact on safety outcomes. We're going to take you through how beliefs, values and attitudes shape safety behaviours, talk about ownership and accountability of OSH and how that helps move organisations beyond compliance and into that enabling value add proposition. So Angela Gray, our technical lead at IOSH, will take you through the session. She'll provide you with a breakdown of just what models of safety are, and I hope you enjoy. Angela, over to you.
Thanks, Stuart, for the introduction. Yes, we're going to talk about the IOSH Models of Safety and a little bit of understanding OSH culture. So I want to first look at the complexity of culture. What is it? It's difficult to find consistent definitions and explanations, but very broadly speaking, it is beliefs and values, which in turn influencing attitudes and behaviours. And attitudes towards OSH are very personal. They are developed within an individual over time from a very early age. Attitudes are influenced by many factors: the country and culture you were raised in, your parents, siblings, your teachers, your friends, colleagues, and also other events and experiences that have shaped your life. For example, someone who has witnessed a fatal car accident will predictably have a very different attitudes towards road safety than someone who hasn't. So it's those life experiences that shape your attitude. Culture has been called the way of life for an entire society, with traditions, beliefs, languages, etc. being passed down from generation to generation. But when you take a step down and look at workplace culture describes the character of an organisation, including the values, attitudes, and the traditions its employees hold. Take another step down, safety culture. Safety culture describes the predominant or prevailing attitude towards safety, health and well-being across a particular workforce and the value placed on good OSH practice and performance. And you may have heard the phrase, it's how we do things around here. And that is, in a nutshell, what it is. There are arguments and many debates regarding the subject of safety culture, what it really is there such a thing? But the overall workplace culture will certainly influence any safety culture, and both will be largely influenced by the societal culture and the environment that the workplace is in. Saying all of that, however, it would be naive to think of any organisation as having a single, uniform, cohesive culture. And many studies have identified the presence of subcultures within organisations. Now, these are likely to develop where different work groups are faced with different tasks, different levels of risk, different working conditions, and even different leaders or managers. Now, speaking about health and safety maturity models and cultural maturity models, if you do an internet search for health and safety maturity models, you'll find many. The most prominent ones seen here on this slide, the Bradley curve, Hudson's models, etc. These are all the basis of most maturity models for health and safety that you will find. Often an organisation will create their own model based on these, but using their own words and phrases to make it more relatable to their own workforce. Now, there is definitely a journey to cultural maturity, and this can take time, often and very often years. There are basically three aspects to consider at each stage: workplace and legal compliance, the OSH management systems and processes, and human factors and behaviours. And whilst all three will factor at all times, the focus and the amount of activity around each of them will vary, depending on where that organisation's maturity sits at that present time. But initially, an organisation will focus on ensuring compliance. Once they have a good grasp on this, they will want to make sure that they have the systems and processes in place to help maintain this level of compliance. So that's when this focus starts to shift to the IOSH management systems. There will come a time when they ask themselves, well, we've got good workplace compliance. Our safety management system is really good and comprehensive. Why are we still having accidents? This is when the focus switches to behaviours. And this is where we start talking about beliefs, values, and attitudes. If you look below the line on the slide, I just want to talk a little bit about attitudes or prevailing attitudes at each point in time on that journey. So in the early stages of awareness of IOSH culture and looking to mature what each organisation has in place, in the early stages, the general attitude towards health and safety across the workforce is, it's just not my problem. And it's my manager's responsibility to keep me safe at work. End of story. But then as the systems and the processes start to mature, the attitude changes slightly in so much as the individual workers will be thinking about, well, I do need to think about my own safety, but I'm still reliant on my manager to keep me safe and to tell me how to work safely. But then ultimately, in the later stages of maturity, the attitude tends to be broader, and the workers understand that they have a responsibility to look out for themselves, but also their colleagues and the workers around them. And the party line really is that safety is a priority for all of us. So moving on to the IOSH model of safety, like I said earlier, there are basic models in place if you look for them, but they're all very much on similar lines. Now, the IOSH model of safety has 4 stages: embryonic, active, proactive, and integrated. And what we've done on this slide that you can see now is we've picked out 6 characteristics that can illustrate where an organisation or the behaviours within the organisation at a point in time. And so I'm going to now look at each one in turn. For this first characteristic within the IOSH model of safety, we're talking about understanding of IOSH risk, but often it's more about risk perception, or the perception of risk that sits within the organisation. So at an early stage of development, it's very limited. There'll be some obvious and basic risks identified, and these are usually driven by legislative requirements and very specific to the nature of the operation. The range of risks will probably be confined to what they know, but another factor could be that they just don't believe that there's any risks involved in the work that they're doing. And you'll have heard people say, I'm sure, that they've done this for years with no issues. We've done it this way with no problems. Why do you want to change it now? And that's the sort of attitude at that level of maturity. And then as you progress through the 4 levels of maturity, you start to see a more systematic approach to quantifying the level of risk, through to then differentiating between enterprise risks or the risks that are going to impact on the achievements of objectives, long-term value of the business. And then finally, you'll have a really clear understanding of risks linked to return on investment and to commercial indicators. The risk profile identifies and distinguishes between preventable risks, strategy risks, and those external risks which are beyond the business's influence or control. And at this point, the management approach for each category is well defined and understood within the organisation, and where actual risk exceeds appetite, justified solutions will be identified to ensure full accountability and confidence in future decision making. And the risk profile differentiates between operational and significant risks and drives the focus on the major risks to that business and its people. Another factor, another characteristic of an IOSH culture is the prevailing attitude towards IOSH across the whole workforce. And at an early stage, it's basically safety by natural instinct. This means that leaders and workers have a mixed and diverse attitude towards occupational safety and health, all based on their own experiences, their own beliefs and values. And individuals will draw on their own instincts to decide when deciding their actions or even inactions when making choices at work. The overriding belief in the organisation at this lower level of maturity is that ill health and workplace accidents are an inevitable cost of doing business, and workers believe that it is the role of their leaders to keep them safe. So this is something I referred to on a previous slide. But as you move up that maturity curve, workers believe that accidents only happen to others, and they will still take shortcuts if the reward exceeds the risk to getting the job done. But ultimately, at a more mature stage, the organisation absolutely believes, and this is from senior leadership all the way down through the workforce, that ill health and accidents at work are completely preventable. Everyone will take pride and personal accountabilities for ensuring a safe and healthy workplace. There's there'll be high hazard awareness across the workforce, supported by an innate understanding of risk potential and the profound effect workplace accidents can have. So the next characteristic I'm just going to discuss is, where does IOSH responsibility sit? Or where is it perceived to sit? So at an early stage of development, at the embryonic stage, there is limited understanding of IOSH risks, and the overriding belief in the organisation, like I just said, is that ill health and workplace accidents are just an inevitable cost of doing business. And technical IOSH expertise will be engaged on an as and when basis. Even when organisations have a full-time professional employed, there is often limited integration with operational teams. So at this early stage of development, all of the responsibility for health and safety will be perceived as sitting with the IOSH professional. But as you move through the curve, that safety professional will start to increase operational engagement and promote local ownership of IOSH issues within the operation. And then ultimately, IOSH responsibility, accountability for performance and cultural maturity sits firmly with the operational leadership teams. The leadership teams have clarity of purpose and have specific accountabilities for delivery of the IOSH strategic plan, its objectives and its goals. The role of the IOSH leader or the IOSH professional at this stage is to inform and advise and maybe coach the operational leaders to aid their progress against those organisational goals. And their input and involvement are valued and actively sought by those operational leaders. At the integrated level of maturity, good IOSH practice and performance is valued and viewed as an essential element of doing business. It is promoted as a core component required end-to-end of their value chain. And this could be evidenced, for example, in the standards set for supplier selection And businesses will only partner with other businesses that either maintain comparable standards for IOSH or demonstrate a real commitment for improvement. In this fourth slide, the role of the IOSH profession. This is just understanding how the role of the IOSH professional needs to adapt and change over time to meet the needs of their organisation as it matures, as it's on that journey to maturity. There will always be a need for technical skills, legal compliance, system development, audits, that sort of thing. But the senior IOSH leader will need to be more commercially aware and cognizant of the organisation's approach to business and the wider context in which it operates, both internally and externally. So in the early stages, at the embryonic stage, the primary expectation of the IOSH professional at this level is to ensure legal compliance for the organisation. They will be expected to know all legal obligations of the business and identify and implement the necessary procedures and processes, essentially to keep them out of trouble and to keep them compliant. An IOSH management system is starting to take shape at this embryonic level. There will be an element of reactive controls in response to accidents or incidents, but these will develop in line with legislative requirements and workplace compliance. Moving on, once those systems are in place, the role of the IOSH professional is often perceived as a policing role. So not a great word, but in other words, making sure that the systems and processes that have been put in place stay in place and that the workforce and the leadership teams are adhering to those systems. So by conducting observations, inspections, walkthroughs, etc. These would be prevalent to ensure that any non-compliances are identified, reported and actioned. But then the next step, when you get up to the proactive level, is about providing assurance. As the accountability for delivery of IOSH performance shifts to the operational leadership team, the safety team focuses on the provision of assurance rather than the policing element. And assurance is aimed at improving the quality of information for the decision makers, the senior leadership team. Assurance is a way to provide confidence that the information on which the senior team makes decisions is reliable, processes are effective, and therefore help to control or reduce those risks. At a more mature level, at the integrated level, the IOSH professional really is seen as a strategic enabler. So the senior IOSH professional is considered an integral part of the senior leadership team. In other words, a critical friend, providing guidance, coaching and insight for the leadership decision-making, strategic direction and the risk mitigation activities. They will consistently add value, including during non-IOSH business development discussions and the wider strategic planning. The safety team at this stage in maturity is viewed as an enabling function, driving broader business values. They are a valued and trusted resource, bringing external insight to emerging IOSH trends and innovations. So that whole role of the IOSH professional will change over time in line with the maturity of their organisation. I want to move on now to leadership behaviour. All leaders in an organisation cast a shadow. Their values, beliefs and attitudes shape their behaviours, which in turn influence their team. This concept of the unconscious influence of a manager is known as the shadow of the leader, which, as the name suggests, relates to the influence, and this could be for better or worse, of the leader on their team or teams. A leader's shadow may be cast so wide that it affects the culture of an entire organisation, or at least can influence the climate at a specific period in time. So leadership behaviour is absolutely key, or the correct leadership behaviour is absolutely key to moving culture forward within an organisation. So at a very early level of maturity, at the embryonic stage, it's all very reactive. Operational or productivity performance will take precedence over IOSH performance. IOSH performance is viewed as separate and additional to general performance in role. Transactional leadership styles prevail at this level. Leaders respond or become active only after an incident or failure, and often look to apportion blame as opposed to understanding the cause and taking learnings on board. So at the early stages of maturity, leaders, and I'm talking in very generalistic terms, but in general, it's very reactive to IOSH incidents. As we move up the maturity curve, leadership and behaviour will start to change, although recognition of IOSH accountability at operational leadership level is starting to emerge. Behaviours and attitudes are inconsistent and are greatly influenced by current operational conditions or focus. So if there's particular pressure on for example, a production line or a need to launch a new product, that will still take precedence over making sure the job's done safely. And at this stage, leadership behaviours also tend to focus on enforcing compliance to the emerging management system rather than driving improvement. So they'll just focus on making sure they're meeting the requirements of the management system. Moving on in time and up that maturity curve, when we get to proactive level, leadership should be very more inspiring to the workforce. Leaders will become a visible inspiration to the organisation, acting with integrity, genuine belief in the business value unlocked by great IOSH performance. They will also start to display traits of true transformational leadership. They will walk the talk and taking their teams with them through the use of motivators, recognition, reward, incentives, and they inspire their team to drive IOSH maturity, and they will celebrate achievements as well. Moving up to the integrated level of maturity, this is where we talk about authenticity of leaders. Leaders are present in the workplace and openly discuss health and safety issues with workers as routine, not as a one-off purposeful conversation, but as routine. They are authentic and trusted by their teams, and they genuinely court input and feedback from their teams, and most importantly, they act upon it. They strive to create and maintain a positive climate in which the organisation's IOSH culture continues to strengthen and mature. At this level, strong, visible, felt leadership behaviours are evident through all layers of the organisation, and they are credible and impactful. Finally, I want to now just look at the management systems and the purpose and the intent of those management systems. So the health and safety management system is the framework. It is absolutely specific to an organisation's risk profile, and it pulls together all of the various policies, planning, safe systems of work, information and guidance required to maintain good IOSH management. An IOSH management system should be considered as live and not set in stone, because it needs to constantly evolve with what's happening within the business. It starts with defining the vision, the aspiration, and the strategic direction the business is taking. And at this point, the policy statement is critical in defining this, because this statement sets the tone going forward. However, as the organisation matures, the safety management system should become less prescriptive and be more principle-based, and it's constructed in a way that empowers all leaders, managers, workers to make the right decisions and to take accountability for their own safe behaviours. So just to wrap up, really, the IOSH Model of Safety looks at maturity across 4 levels. We start with embryonic, active, move on to proactive, and into integrated. And very roughly, and obviously this will change and be applied differently within different organisations, but the first 2 levels, the general focus is IOSH compliance, whereas the second 2 levels look at beyond compliance, for want of a better phrase. The 6 characteristics: understanding of IOSH risk, the prevailing attitudes across the workplace towards IOSH, where IOSH responsibility truly sits, whether that's within the health and safety team or within the operational leadership team, what the role of the IOSH professional is at various stages of maturity, and how that role will change and evolve over time. Likewise, leadership behaviours will evolve and change over time, from their very transactional leadership at the start of the journey to transformational leadership at the end, where, you know, really authentic felt leadership is apparent. And then the management system obviously supports all of that and enables good health and safety management and performance, starting off with, let's just make sure we comply with legislation, all the way up to where we have a really engaged and empowered workforce using that management system to best effect.
So there you have it. A big thank you to Angela, and that was a cracking session. There was a lot in there, and it certainly made me think about or rethink about my leadership shadow. So if you want to find out a little bit more, or if you've got any questions, then please reach out to the team that are on the screen, and do get in touch with them. We're here to help. So thank you for tuning in. I hope that it's been helpful and useful, and that you found it enjoyable. And as your IOSH President, keep healthy, stay safe. Goodbye.